Good morning. I'm Kristen Bussey. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees this morning. The pronouns that I use for myself are she, her. And just to give you a little bit more about me, I'm one of your newly elected Board of Trustee members. And prior to that, my husband and I moved here in about 2008, and we began attending regularly at that time, and then didn't join until a little bit later. And then I've helped out with some RE as well as on the Earth Ministry team as well. So I look forward to this opportunity serving in a different function. So we are all happy to be in person at this service. Hello to all of you watching online. I want to draw your attention to 4 announcements. First, you can now enter a joy or concern using a QR code and your phone included in your order of service for that QR code. Before Denise Colley leaves us at the end of July, it'd be great if we could use the cool QR code to show her that we can use it. Of course, you can always write them down old school style on a yellow or green sheet of paper and give it to the usher, or you can email it to Rev Denise as well. So some additional announcements that are in your order of service. The interim ministers transition team. You can click on the link in your e-news to learn more about that important work that's ongoing. I'd also like to highlight the farewell picnic for Rev Denise with her last service on July 31st. We're going to have a potluck picnic, and UUCW is going to supply the hot dogs and brats. We would like to send her out in style, and she, has done a lot this short time that she was with us, and we'd love to celebrate with you all. Also, a call for volunteers for ushers, greeters, and coffee servers. Join our welcoming team. We need you. Click on the links in your e-news, and the QR code is an option as well. And finally, the guest house. Our next turn at the guest house is Saturday, July 16th. So finally, if you're newer here or have not heard from us after checking your spam folders, or even if you just have a question, please pop us an email, tell us a bit about yourself. We would love to hear what you are seeking. Please email us at visitor@uucw.org. Again, this is visitor@uucw.org. We would love to connect with you.
Hi, my name is Kathy Bradshaw, and the pronouns that I am using today are she and they, and I am delighted to welcome back Beth Monhollen. Beth began on her UU path over 20 years ago, and since 2013 is an official member of First Church Milwaukee. It was there that she began her discernment, her call to ministry that would allow her to use skills gained as a writer, actor, and educator for the spiritual development of others. Beth worked at Alverno College for 18 years, serving as an academic advisor for undergraduate students, teaching various courses, including Intro to Theater. Her time there concluded in May 2021, when her path led her to complete an intensive chaplaincy training during that summer at Selber Family Hospice. Beth is at her 2/3 of her milestone, 1 more year to go for her Master of Divinity at Meadville Lombard. She's doing a multi-platform ministry internship with WellSprings UU in Chester, Pennsylvania. Beth grounds her work, her theology, on experiencing the divine through our interconnections and interdependence on one another. And it is from that sense of connection that she is carrying out her ministry. Welcome, Beth. Thank you for joining.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll do this. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Church West, for having me again. Whoever you are, from wherever you come, you are welcome here. Whoever you love, however you define family, you are welcome. The identities you hold, how you want to be called, the pronouns you use are respected and welcomed here. Whatever the color of your skin, the language your grandparents spoke, the cultures that move in your being, the abilities and disabilities you hold, we welcome you here. Whatever you believe, whatever your theology, prayer, or sacrament, even if none at all, we welcome you. We unite in Unitarian Universalist principles. We are a community of communities, spiritual seekers acting on behalf of justice, united in covenant and a spirit of love. We welcome all of you. Welcome to our service of love.
Please join in, well, you get to hum along, sorry. Please join in humming along as I sing Our World is One World, hymn number 134. What I really love about this hymn is the way it reminds us to connect and reminds us how we are connected in so many ways and how we are all one.
Touches one affects us all. The seas that wash us round about, the clouds that cover us, the rains that fall. Our world is one world. The thoughts we think affect us all. The way we build our attitudes with love or hate we make a bridge or wall. Our world is one world. Its ways of wealth affect us all. The way we spend, the way we share, are the rich or poor, who stand or fall. Our world is one world, just like a ship that bears us all, where fear and greed make many holes, but where our hearts can hear a different call.
And now for the chalice lighting, which is On the Brink by Reverend Leslie Takahashi Morris. Please read along, and if you are joining us at home, feel free to kindle your own chalice or candle. All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all that we aspire to create. A deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a greater generosity of spirit, a deeper joy in this life we share.
I'd like to invite us into a brief time of both spoken and silent meditation. I don't know about you, but I often find myself totally inside my head. Do you ever get that way? And you're like, oh, right, I have a body, and it's been breathing and keeping me alive while I was off somewhere else, doing my to-do lists, thinking of everything I have to do today, remembering some conversation I wish had gone a different way. And so, knowing that oh so human tendency to be in our heads will often keep us disconnected from these bodies that move us through this world, I invite us to take a few deep breaths, as deep as y'all can take through those masks. Thank you for keeping each other safe. But take some breaths. And whether you have been aware of it or not, that breath has been moving in and out in its own rhythm. Every moment of your life so far, that breath calls you to be in your body, to be connected to your own life, which is connected to all the other life in this room, the life joining us across the internet, all the lives we intersect with, connected in our breath. So keep breathing and be here now in your body in this moment. Here now as you breathe, I invite you to keep breathing and hear the words of this brief meditative song by musician Ali Halpert. Loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry the weight of the world in your muscles and bones. Let go, let go, let go. Loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry the weight of the world in your muscles and bones. Let go, let go, let go. Let go, let go, let go. Let go, let go, let go.
Don't you love it when the mask gets twisted in your glasses? To love well is the task in all meaningful relationships, not just romantic bonds. Realistically, being part of a loving community does not mean we will not face conflicts, betrayals, negative outcomes from positive actions, or bad things happening to good people. Love allows us to confront these negative realities in a manner that is life-affirming and life-enhancing. We all long for loving community. It enhances life's joys and heightens our capacity for fellowship with one another. Herein are readings.
Take this off. It's so nice to see people. When I was invited to preach here in January, it was when we were all still like, And so it was wonderful to meet Kathy and Ruben and Dave, and I think one other person was in the room. But to see more people is a blessing, is it not? Masked or not, it's wonderful to be here with you. And again, for anyone and everyone joining us online, we are grateful for the ways that we can gather in multiple spaces as a community. So thank you all for having me back. Thank you for Reverend Denise for reaching out and saying, we need someone to come in and preach. And I said, well, I happen to be in town, and I am happy and honored to get to be here with you today. In January, the sermon I gave, I shared a bit about the fact that I grew up the first 12 years of my life where my family is from in eastern Kentucky and Tennessee. And so I want to tell you a little story that starts there. And it's actually about when I was around 10 years old, and I had what I call a near almost drowning experience in a big pond at my friend Michelle's house. It was a hot summer day, and there was about 24 of us kids who had been given permission to tromp up the dirt road and go swimming without adult supervision. So there we were, ranging in age probably from 7 to 17, loudly laughing and joking as we made our way up to one of our favorite ponds. And it was a favorite, you see, because it was really big, and it was a natural spring-fed pond that had a nice shallow end that didn't really have a beach per se, but the ground was soft and sandy, and the shallows went out really far. I, as a little, y'all, I'm not quite 5 feet tall, and I wasn't at the age of 10 either, but I could walk out to my knees, my belly, up to my chin. The water stayed around that 4-foot mark for at least 15, 20 feet out. But the other great thing about this pond is that the bank sloped up, and if you were a particularly bold and brave swimmer, you could climb up that bank and cannonball and dive right into the deep middle part of the pond. So on this day, the big kids who were a little bolder and sure of their swimming were indeed out practicing their diving and their backstrokes and whatever the big kids were doing, while those of us who were a little younger and maybe less sure swimmers were splashing around at that shallow end, practicing our floating and our treading of water, learning how to doggy paddle. We'd been playing for a while, and there suddenly came from the middle of the pond much louder, raucous kinds of shouts, and I turned in time to see 2 of the big kids racing up that bank at a breakneck speed, and without pausing, they cannonballed together. Splashes and laughter ensued, and I took a step closer, maybe to get a closer look, I'm not sure, and my foot, instead of landing on solid ground, felt the sand melt under my toes, and my head went under. And I panicked, like you do, and forgot, of course, that I was close to the shore, forgot my friends were right there, forgot I did know how to doggy paddle at least, and instead I just flailed my little arms and legs, my head bopping up for air without making a sound, flailing, hearing sounds, but not knowing which direction it was coming from. Was I going towards the deep end or back to the shore? Head coming up, down again, up, and before I could panic even more, I felt a hand shove hard against my shoulder, and my body moved through the water, and I felt another hand yank my other arm, and my feet finally, gratefully, found that solid ground I'd been looking for. My sister, who had hold of my arm, kept pulling me till we got to the shallow end where I could kneel and cough up pond water, while my friend Michelle, who's the one who had shoved me, pounded me on the back. The other kids who had been there at the shallow end and witnessed this began to tell the story to each other. Did you see her face? Did you see her head go under? Thank God Michelle and April were there. And then later, when the big kids came back to shore, everybody had to tell them the story too. And of course, it had gotten bigger, and I had almost died, even though the whole incident took only like 15 seconds, and I was never in any real danger. But the big kids laughed at me and teased me for forgetting I could dog paddle, congratulated my saviors for their quick thinking, And we all agreed, in the way that children do, that we should maybe not tell this story to any of the grown-ups, lest they never let us go out unsupervised again. And of course, we continued to laugh and play because kids are resilient, but I have to be honest, that feeling of terror, of having my head go under while the ground beneath me melted, stayed with me for a really long time. And I've been thinking about that feeling pretty regularly for the past 2.5 years, because if there is a better metaphor for what happened in our world when the pandemic hit than the ground melting out from under us, I cannot think of a better metaphor for what's happened to our world. Can you remember January 2020? I mean, it was only 2 years ago, but it feels like 200, right? Like, we were all in January of 2020 making our New Year's resolutions, making plans for what the year would bring. And then in February, we began to hear the rumors of the pandemic around the world and would it make it to our shores. And then in March, the shutdown happens. Death tolls rose, hospitals filled up. And I remember, do you remember that feeling of both fear and disorientation, of not knowing which way you could go to safety? I remember the sadness as people began to lose their jobs and other people were forced to keep going to them, not knowing if they were going to bring the illness home to their families or get it themselves. And I remember what we might call the smaller griefs of milestone celebrations, like graduations only being able to be marked with a card, weddings being postponed, and birthdays being celebrated not with parties, but just with drive-by parades. One of my friends, actually, for all of 2020, instead of wishing people happy birthday, she would say to them, "You get a do-over." And here we are, more than 2 years later, still wishing we could have a do-over. And it's not just the pandemic, of course, but it is the socio-political landscape that has also washed the ground away from us. The January 6th insurrection, the hundreds of bills the federal House has passed that have languished in the Senate, the hundreds of bills against trans and LGBTQ people that have passed at the state levels. Our own state limiting access to voting rights and refusing to create fair and equitable maps. People across the country showing up at their school boards, shouting vilely against diversity. Black people continue to be killed by police. Police continue to not be held accountable. And the elephant in the room, I think, is all the decisions from the U.S. Supreme Court. The two most heartbreaking ones for me are the ones that have enshrined private gun ownership, while the second one, of course, stripping away our rights to privacy and bodily autonomy. Solid ground just keeps washing away. And the precarity of life, I think, has been made, to me at least, so clear in the past 2 years. But part of the surprise, I think, is that so many people have been surprised by how precarious life is. Because as Sonia Renee Taylor, who is an activist and a poet, and I consider her one of my modern day prophets, Sonia Renee Taylor said eloquently in the summer of 2020, "We want to go back to normal, but normal never was. Normal was not working for too many of us," she said. Because normal for so many people, even before the pandemic, was the fact that they had no solid ground. There was a meme that still makes the round, and maybe you all saw it last year, that said, "We're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat." And for too many people here in our country, here in this very community, the boat they were on even before the pandemic was barely a life raft. And normal for so many people was worrying, will I have enough money to pay my bills this month? Normal was worrying, will the food in my pantry last this week? Normal was worrying, where will I sleep tonight? Normal for too many people was never actually having access to good health care. Normal was not even being able to have the illusion of safety. The ground was always melting. But even for those of us, and I am hoping, truly hoping that it is most of us in this room who've had our basic needs met during this pandemic, the fact is, even if we have an abundance, even if we have what we think is solid ground, life is still precarious. We know that grief can come knocking at any moment. We know, don't we, that death is actually the only sure thing in this life. How many of us have had the ground knocked out from under us by the unexpected tragic accident, by the late-stage cancer diagnosis, by the heart that stops beating when you're just out mowing the lawn on a sunny day? All things that have happened to people I know and love in the past year. And even if it isn't death, our plans will still get scattered. There's so much uncertainty. A baby that gets born 2 months early, the unexpected layoff, the divorce papers being served. And lest you think that I am all doom and gloom, there are happy things that make our plans melt underneath us. How many of us have fallen in love when we least expected it? That will turn your plans on end and make you feel like you are drowning in deep, beautiful water. We face life's precariousness all the time, whether we are aware of it or not. And it's a normal human reaction, though, when we become aware of it, even in the best of times, and certainly these are not the best of times, that when we face that precariousness, when we become aware of it, that we want something solid and sure to hold on to. It's a human response in the face of that precariousness to move into despair or denial. And I think despair looks something like this. No, I can't handle it. I can't handle that everything I love could be taken from me at any moment. And so we numb ourselves instead. We risk little and we love even less, so afraid of losing things that we become frozen in existential dread. Despair is a normal response, and so is denial. And I believe we have all, God bless us, seen what denial can look like in the past 2 years of people saying, no, you are wrong. This is solid ground under me. And I know it's solid ground because I believe it's solid ground, and I believe it's solid ground because my leaders told me so, or my religion told me so, or my God tells me so. And in denial of the melting ground of life, people will cling to their own version of reality, because to do otherwise is to admit that at any moment we could drown. And it feels safer to have all the answers, to have the answers handed to us. It feels safer to think the boat I'm in is going to keep me safe, and I don't have to worry about the questions and confusions. And there are theological underpinnings for that stance. It's a cultural belief, actually, I think especially in America, that's woven so deeply into our DNA that we're not even always aware of it. And while we are not, as many people would assert, and some people are trying to establish, a Christian nation, we've certainly been influenced very deeply by Christian ideas, and especially, for those who want a history lesson, Calvinist ideas of Christianity, interpretations of ancient scriptures that look at how the Hebrew people looked at God, which was like this, that God has a plan and is in control of everything, and all the people living under God's plan live with both God's promise and retribution. And that was a comfort to the ancient Israelites as they wandered homeless. A comfort to be like, Something at least is bigger than me, and God will take care of this. And the Calvinists and other Protestant Christians held on to that notion that there is a plan. And there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And if we can just figure out the one right way, we'll all be okay. And even for people in America who are not Christians, who do not believe in God, that idea that there's a plan and a purpose for everything, we live it, we act that way, even if we don't know what its root is. And we can see that idea in how we talk about, I think of this one because of my own personal background as a kid who grew up in poverty, where we are like, hey, if you're a poor person, you just must not be working hard enough, and so we're going to make you work harder. And that's America's safety net. That's the normal so many people have. That's rooted in that theological idea that God has a plan for us. And tied into that notion that God has a plan for us is the idea that if God does have a plan for us, that must mean, I think this is a twisted bit of logic, that if you are suffering, that you did something wrong and God's punishing you and you deserve that suffering. And so we then just watch your suffering because we think you deserve it. And we also use that as a shield to distance ourselves from it. You're suffering because God wants you to be, and I'm not suffering, which must mean I did something right, which means God is rewarding me. I'm doing what's right. I'm going to live on this solid ground, and God will protect me. Have you heard people say that? Have you seen people behave that way? Perhaps at some point in your life, I know in mine, when I was younger, I sometimes thought that bad thing won't happen to me if I just do this right thing. It's a way of denying life's precariousness. It's actually a way of also denying people's lived realities. And it's a stance that refuses to accept, for example, why someone might need an abortion. It's a stance that refuses to accept that we might need diversity and inclusion to become more whole as people. It refuses to believe that we have mutual responsibility for each other's thriving. It's a theology that denies life's precariousness and simultaneously enshrines the individual as the most holy thing. The belief that God has a plan and the belief in the sacredness of the individual are two, I think, cornerstones of American culture that we need. We need to dismantle. But that sacredness of the individual is embedded in our Constitution, our culture, are upheld by capitalism and white supremacy. It says there are body hierarchies, and some bodies matter and some don't, and you best be in the group of bodies that matter, because if not, you're going to get left behind. But that notion of the individual as all that matters denies the fact not only that life is precarious, it denies the fact that there is no individual at all. There is no I without we. Community and our longing for it, as Bell Hooks said, is elemental to our human condition. We cannot be who we are as individuals except through our relationships. We cannot know each other except by knowing each other in relationship. Like, if you want to get to know me, you'd have to know where I come from. You might hear some stories about my childhood, about my family, the books I love to read, the people who have made me who I am. And it's the same with you. If I want to get to know you, you talk about yourself by telling me who you love, what grade your kids are in, the names of your pets. We are only each other in relationship with each other. That's what makes us who we are. And a theology that denies that denies our very interdependence, is a theology that says you're alone in the water and you can pretend it's not there. And that is a life-limiting theology. And I want a theology, I want a way of being in the world that is life-sustaining. And it is part of why I became a Unitarian Universalist, and I imagine it's probably part of why some of you became Unitarian Universalists. Because ours is not a theology of dogma and creeds and sure answers. Ours is a process theology, and that means it's a theology of becoming together all the time, of recognizing that the divine, whatever we name it, is always unfolding and revealing within and among and through us. Ours is a process theology that says, yes, life is precarious, and yes, we are interconnected, and yes, because of those interconnections, we can not only survive, but we can thrive through life's uncertainty. It's why I'm a Unitarian Universalist. It's why I'm in seminary. It's why I'm here today, because I believe it is our interconnections that make us whole. But lest we get too self-congratulatory as Unitarian Universalists, and lest we hold on too pridefully to the fact that we are a slightly more adaptable faith movement, a little more open to the fact that the ground is actually sand under our feet, let us remember that we are also humans, and we too sometimes want a version of a right answer. Which is ironic, of course, because as Unitarian Universalists, I think all of us would be really distrustful if someone came up and said, I have the right answer for you. We wouldn't quite believe them. But there is a part, that human part of us, that wants it. And that's okay. We have to have grace for that. That's still why we come together. Because our principles say that when we come together, it is to support each other in spiritual growth. Not that we're perfect and already done, but that we're going to grow together spiritually. Our fourth principle says that we do that by freely and responsibly searching for truth and meaning together. It is the search that matters for Unitarian Universalists. Not that we're going to get to that one right answer, but that we're going to search for it, that we're going to create meaning together. And yet I have heard some Unitarians, I've witnessed arguments about this, where people will say that fourth principle is the best principle because it has the word free in it. And can you hear that thread of American individualism and holding on to our freedom? And I am not here to tell anybody what to believe. But I do want to point out, if you're like, yes, the freedom is the most important part, that you might miss part of the point of that particular principle because it's free and responsible. And responsible implies that we are in relationship with each other. I am responsible to you, and you are responsible to me as we search for and create meaning. And that's why, instead of having a creed or a dogma, what we have is community and what we have is covenant. We covenant as a faith community because our faith movement is not going to give us specific answers. It instead provides us with guardrails that we can come together as people to affirm our inherent worth, to support each other in that spiritual growth as we search for meaning, knowing that we can use democratic processes to make space for all voices, to honor our interconnectedness to all life, as we dismantle the oppressive systems that deny and harm and try to disrupt that interconnection. It's not a creed, my friends. It's a way of being together. And through that, we honor all the different boats that everybody's in without denying or belittling or refusing to be aware of the storm. We covenant together in community as Unitarian Universalists because there is only community. There is no I without we, and we need each other. We long for each other. Covenant is big enough to hold us in the most uncertain of times. Covenant is the community that helps us refill our oxygen tank. You know, the metaphor of when you're on a plane and if the oxygen mask falls, to put it on yourself first or for somebody else. There was an essay in UU World magazine 4 years ago written by a Unitarian Universalist named Trudy Frazell, and she talked about the fact that that metaphor is okay, but it misses some critical pieces about what covenantal community provides. One thing about that old metaphor is it implies there's some external force that's going to tell you when you need some oxygen, that's going to tell you when you're in water that's too deep. Instead, she uses the metaphor of scuba divers who still have personal responsibility for checking their tank and all of their equipment, for knowing if they're a good swimmer and how far down they can go today, but they are never in the water alone. They have a dive partner who will also look at their tank as you look at your partner's tank. There's somebody up on top in a boat who's also monitoring each of you, who can give your little rope a tug and say your air's getting low. Come back up. Community and covenant is the oxygen tanks that we're monitoring together. Sometimes we need to dive deep into the waters. Sometimes we're going to mess it up, and covenant lets us do that together. Covenant, if we'll go back to my story for a moment, covenant is the big kids out in the middle of the water, living their best life, diving deeper, swimming better, laughing joyfully, not because there is solid ground underneath them, but because they have each other. They watch out for each other. They're responsible for each other. And when they need it, they can help each other get back to shore. Covenant in our faith communities at its best lets us experience the fullness of freedom together. It helps us to take deep breaths even when water is rushing towards us. It helps us to be held even when the ground is melting. It does not promise, as Bell Hook's reading implied, that we are always going to get it right. It doesn't promise that there's not going to be any pain. It doesn't promise that we won't sometimes hurt each other. But covenant promises instead that when those things happen, we will be held in community, that we can be held accountable with love, that our inherent worth will be honored, and we will meet each other in mutual care and support. And that is holy, holy work. And I can't think of anything more holy and miraculous and ordinary than coming together as people with the full awareness that life is precious and precarious and could be taken from us at any moment, and saying, I am still here with you. What a precious, ordinary miracle that I wasn't in that water alone, that there were people watching out for me who could give me a shove and a pull and say, you went in too deep. You forgot what you were about, and we're still here for you. We know that the ground is always melting. And I hope we know, as a faith community, as Unitarian Universalists, that covenant is calling to us in love so that we do not give in to despair or denial. Covenant reminds us we are in this together, that yes, life is precarious and it is precious. And we are, in the words of poet Marge Piercy, we are each other's miracle. May it be so today and in all the days to come. Amen.
UU Church West Split the Plate program is one of outreach and generosity. Each month, we give half of all undesignated offerings to a nonprofit organization to help us live our Unitarian Universalist values and serve our community. Our Split the Plate partner for June through mid-July is Worthy Now Prison Ministry, which operates within the Unitarian Universalists Association's Church of the Larger Fellowship, or CLF. CLF is a congregation without walls, connecting people all over the world via the internet for spiritual growth. The Worthy Now Prison Ministry serves more than 1,500 incarcerated people who identify as UUs. Most learned about Unitarian Universalism from others who are incarcerated. Interested persons are registered for an Introduction to Unitarian Universalism correspondence course, and upon completion of that course, they receive a variety of publications, including UU World Magazine and the Worthy Now newsletter. Worthy Now members can also choose from a number of other publications and correspondence courses throughout the year. These classes cover topics such as the prison industrial complex, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and compassionate communication. Worthy Now is currently ministering to 28 prison inmates in Wisconsin. There is, of course, no cost to any incarcerated person for any of the services or publications. Worthy Now relies heavily on the donations of Free World members, grants, and Split the Plate donations. To support Worthy Now anytime this month, go to the UUCW website's Donate tab and select Split the Plate from the menu provided. Or you can text or mail your donation today using the information found here. Today, I thank you for your generosity to Worthy Now and UUCW. We will now accept the offering.
That's better. Thank you, Kathy. Beloveds, as we extinguish this flame this morning, I ask each of you to remember that the source of this light is in each of us and connects all of us in love and community. And may you hold that knowledge close in your heart as you go out into the world today and let your light shine. May it be so.